Okay, I think we'll get started so we can have time to get through all of Michael's material tonight in a timely manner. For all of you who have been here before, you know Michael Skok. He's running a 5-session series on startup secrets, how to give yourself an unfair competitive advantage. Tonight's discussion is going to be around business model analysis, and I know he's brought a number of his portfolio companies to present as well, so it's going to be a lively session. I'm really looking forward to it. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Michael and his team of people.
Well, welcome everybody. We should have a lot of fun this evening. We're going to talk about one, as Jody says, of the multiple things that we put on the original topic, and that being business model. For those of you who've been at the other sessions, this will feel like it's in context. For those of you who haven't been, I just want to get a show of hands who's new here, therefore I can try to cover some of the background. Okay, quite a number of new people actually. Okay, so I will tell you this right before I get going, in which case, the value proposition session, which is up on the website, multicapitalist.com, provides the background to what is it that you do and how do you do it uniquely well for who. That's the simplification of it. A very long 1 hour monologue by me. So there you go. You skip the 1 hour, you've got the essence of it. And based on the value proposition, the business model is all about figuring out how you take that to market as a viable financial, sales, marketing, and even service and support model. So even though you've missed that, just think about whatever idea it is you've got and you're going to figure out how to build a business model around it today. If you missed the company formation piece, that was really around building the team and obviously hiring the people to make that successful basis to take your enterprise and execute. And next session is very much the other side of the coin to business model, because business model is so closely aligned to go-to-market strategy. So that gives you a little bit of context for those who haven't been yet. All right, first of all, I'd just like to make some introductions. We've got a number of the portfolio companies being kind enough to come in as case studies this evening and also to help out in the workshop. So you've got real executives who have real day jobs, real entrepreneurs who have real ideas that can help you as you try to take yours and figure out what your business model is. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the active endpoints two representatives here, Mark Tabor and Eric Eggerson, if you'd just like to stand up. Mark's our CEO and Eric heads up sales. Thank you guys for coming. Okay. And then Akiban, we have David McFarlane and Ori Ernstadt, the CEO and founder respectively. And then from Demandware, who is represented by James Driscoll. I'll just say before he says anything, they're on the roadshow, and so he's basically been told not to say anything.
So no, right. I don't exist. I was never here.
So unfortunately, we can't use his case study, but it's sure we will use one when they get through the roadshow. But thank you for coming. He'll be part of at least the workshop so he can engage with you. And then I'm lucky to have two of my partners here tonight too. I'm quite sure why they're here, except to check that I don't say something out of order. But Jim Murad from Northbridge. And then we also have Carmichael Roberts, who's also brought some special guests with him. Carmichael? No. Okay. Well, we have...
I'm going to get him right now.
Don't worry. We'll introduce him when he comes in. He's brought another of his companies, actually, because Jim and I mostly work on software, but we did want to make sure that people who are not focused on software have a sense that these business model techniques that we're going to talk about tonight actually do apply to many different kinds of ventures. And so, in fact, he's going to talk about one of his companies called MC10, which is in the materials space. Very good. So let's jump in with our agenda. As I said, this is all about building a business model, and I'm particularly going to focus on just 4 things. First of all, finding a disruptive business model. You can all go and discuss what a business model is. You can read about it many different ways. But if you're a startup, the really important thing you're going to try to do is bring disruptive innovation into the marketplace. And that shouldn't just be about technology. The business model is a fundamental piece of it. But how do you find that? Well, I'm going to show you 3 key things. First of all, finding your core differentiation. That is absolutely critical to building a business model. Secondly, what are the multipliers that will help you spread that value proposition in an effective way, getting great market share, great reach, and ultimately great revenue? And then third, very importantly, how do you take the cost out of the equation with levers? And levers, as you'll see, are things that can be highly advantageous to companies that figure out how to use them in their business model. And then last, I'm going to give you a very quick insight into how that plays out in the life cycle of working with your customers. And particularly important here is an example I'm going to bring to light for you of how this plays out in the software world. But again, I would say it's applicable to many different areas. So I mentioned earlier that this is really one side of the coin. The other side of it is go-to-market. So you will feel in some cases like I'm transgressing a little bit into what does it take to go to market, but that's because there's clear linkages here. And then the most important thing about tonight is, of course, the workshop, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that. We've got 10 teams again tonight and 10 helpers, and Jody's organized for us to have the whiteboards to see around the room so everybody can go right there, business models up, and come in and present them, and we'll have the usual voting at the end. Excellent. Well, with that in mind, I'm going to get the boring stuff right out the way right away. Everybody can go read this on the web. There are actually some great books on it. The basics of business models are around creating the value. So that's things like creating your product or service, delivering it. That's things like, obviously, how you take it to market, and then how you harness or monetize or capture the value. But we're here for a reason. We want to talk about startups. And if you're a startup, I want you to start thinking about business models creatively right away. Don't take somebody else's business model as my first piece of advice to you. There are plenty of business models around. In fact, it will be true to say that the best example of business models, of a business model probably hasn't been invented yet. And that's what I hope we'll get from you, is the next generation of interesting business models. Because this is all about how can you make a breakthrough here. It's not about picking somebody else's business model and just applying it to your situation. The chances are at that point you're adding very little value in your startup and you're probably not making any major impact. So I really want you to think about this literally as how do you change the game? If you could come in, for example, to a marketplace and literally rewrite the rules on your own game and cause somebody else to have an innovator's dilemma, imagine how powerful that would be. I would argue that that is at least as important as having a disruptive technology. There are many examples like that. What I encourage you to do is to think about whatever it is you're bringing to market in those kinds of ways. Don't let somebody else write the rules. You write them. In fact, define the whole new game the way that you can. So what's an example? I'm really going to date myself. I put an exclamation mark here. 20 years ago, believe it or not, there was this little company called Symantec. It's a multi-billion-dollar company today. That's the good news. But the bad news is at the time, we were actually a struggling company in many ways. And I would say that with tongue-in-cheek because, obviously it's become very successful. But I think we had more than 20 products. We had everything from add-ins for Lotus 123, if those of you remember back to that, it was the first spreadsheet, to we had languages, think C, think Pascal on the Mac. We had all sorts of products. We had a database, we had a word processor. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And I'm particularly being brought, this is all being brought back to me right now because we're about to have a 20-year reunion for the first 20 years of Symantec this weekend. And all these products and so forth have been coming to light. And so this example just stuck in my mind. And it's really a business model example. The product that was selling best on the Macintosh back then was something called Symantec Antivirus for Mac. And believe it or not, the Mac was plagued with viruses in those days. System 6 or 7 or whatever it was at the time was really an issue. And it was a very successful product for us. And we were selling it as a licensed product. So, whatever it was, dollars, perpetual license, you bought it through at the time, your local retailer. And because it was a chart-topping product, you'd have said at that point, great, we've got that business model nailed. We know how to produce that product, package it, distribute it, sell it. It's the top of the charts. What should we do when we introduce the PC version? Well, the answer is, why don't you just copy the business model? Well, I just told you, I think that's a really bad idea. And so we also stopped and thought about that. And initially, we got it slightly right in that we decided it was important to introduce the PC model with more of a flavor of an upgrade service and an update service because there were many more viruses coming out for the PC. And so, in fact, we were having to get people updates initially once a quarter. And then we realized, wow, it's happening sort of once a month. And then we realized, hey, this is happening regularly. It's probably hard to believe this. At the time, there were probably a maximum of about 100 viruses on the planet when this came out. Now there are tens of thousands, so they come out very regularly. So, of course, what we did was we flipped it all on its head. We actually decided the software was worth nothing because we needed to get that out there as a platform for people to be able to get the virus definitions downloaded to prevent the viruses. And so the real value was not in the software at all. The real value was in having the virus definition before it ever attacked anybody's machine. And so that literally was the turning point. If you were to ask me personally, I think you asked pretty much anybody at Symantec at the time, on the fortunes of that company, because we suddenly created a subscription model that was not a nice to have, it was essential for enterprises. And they didn't care about the software, they cared about the person who had that virus definition first. And suddenly we had a very predictable business because every time a virus came out, we knew people were going to want to download it. Therefore, we knew they were going to want the subscription to be up to date. Therefore, we knew they were going to pay monthly. Therefore, we could see what our revenue was going to be. And it was very, very game-changing. So that's an example from a product standpoint. Any questions on that before I go forward?
So did you, after that, change the Mac model?
Yes. Yes, we did. And in fact, I'll give credit to one of my sales guys here, who was one of the first guys who actually even flipped the entire product line on its head and said, you know what, we're selling a bunch of things like backup, for example, and Norton Utilities was another product we sold. But people really don't want to pay for the software. What they're really doing is trying to get data security and prevent data loss and so forth. So we came up with what he called, and he really deserves the credit for it, a total solution to data security. And in the UK, for example, we took out full-page ads in the Financial Times, and we went to an extraordinary length to get people to understand that what's the most important thing to them that they're actually producing with all this software. It's their data. It's their information. So they really should put that top in terms of creating data protection. And suddenly, as a result of that thinking, we actually started selling a data protection service, and we bundled all of our products together in what we call the total solution. And sales just took off. And if I would go into it even one more level of detail for you, I'd tell you this, which is we used to, on average, sell 1 to 1.5 products per major enterprise per seat. And by bundling 5 or 6 products together, the actual natural average of that turned out to be 2.6. So in other words, we went from 1.5 to 2.6 the value just by bundling that correctly and by taking the game up to being a data security and information protection game. Extraordinarily successful. And my investors at the time who were quite concerned, to say the least, about us going and taking full-page ads out in major newspapers, very quickly lost their concern and saw tremendous results. Okay, so next example. This is not a technology example. This is absolutely a pure-play business example. At the time, I was based in the UK, and I was observing that every major product that came into the UK from a US publisher was largely failing. Failing because they didn't have the investment in management, marketing, distribution, sales, service, and support. Why? Because if you look at the US market, it's 10 times roughly bigger than the UK market. So let's say you're a $10 million company in the US. You may have some, at that point, relative critical mass, even $20 million. Going to the UK, 10th the size and market, you could be maybe a $2 million company. That doesn't really give you much room to invest in marketing or management, distribution or translation, localization, all these other things. So it was very tough for US companies to be successful. And they typically went to just distributors and said, here, we've got a great product, put it in distribution. Well, products don't sell themselves. And so without the marketing and support or translation in some cases, it was very unsuccessful. So I decided to come up with a business model that basically enabled US companies to bring their products to us as one entity, European Software Publishing. And because we had multiple products, we could get the critical mass, all the things I just put up on that management all the way through to distribution. And as a result of that, we were able to provide, for example, introductions to the top times 100 companies, that's a Fortune 1,000 here. And if we'd already got that connection on one product, when we took on another product, it'd be very easy to open the door and say, okay, here's the next product. We did it very selectively, so it wasn't like a long list. It was very successful financially for the US companies too, because we would get these companies to about $20 to $30 million. In other words, highly scaled, highly profitable at that point. And then we would enable them to acquire them back. But it was also acquired back on a basis that there was something called pooling of interest in those days, but just think of it as a tax-efficient way to do it. It was non-dilutive, so it cost them nothing in terms of earnings per share, if you will. And it was ultimately acquiring something that had growing earnings. So the minute they acquired it, it was adding to their top line as well as their bottom line, is therefore to their overall stakeholder value. So it was like incubating, if you will, these companies till they got to the point that they were successful, and then acquiring them back on this anti-dilutive basis, on this just highly profitable basis. And as an example, Symantec itself, which is one of the companies that we brought over, was a huge win. I put this picture up there because I say it's a huge win, but then my wife always reminds me that the two Bibles that it took, is that they were huge, thick things. To conclude that deal was the pain involved in it. So there was a lot involved in doing that. But the win-win here for investors, for the early investors, was a 97x in their money, your sentiment. And yet Symantec themselves doubled the value at an accretive basis acquiring the company. So the day after the acquisition was was announced, the company's share price went up, and also, more importantly, the continuing earnings streams continued to contribute, and Symantec in the UK was their most profitable business outside of the US and behind. So everybody won. We made customers happy, we obviously made our shareholders happy, and in the middle of this thing, we made Symantec as an entity more successful. It had nothing to do with technology, absolutely nothing. Although, by the way, I was very passionate about Symantec products and stayed on and continues to actually really enjoy working with them. But my point is here, this is an example of something that you should be thinking about. Even if you've got a breakthrough technology, what are the things that will make a win-win for you? So tonight I'm going to talk to you about that and hopefully give you enough examples about it. I don't think I need to say more about this, but I've hopefully made it clear to you that it is at least as important. But now I want to give you a specific reason why the business model is as important as technology. So before I give you the answer, can anyone tell me why, in financial terms, business models should be considered as important as technology? Any thoughts? Well, I've given you some examples, but can anybody give me?
Products don't sell it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Products don't sell themselves. So no matter how good your technology, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you're on exactly the right track. Products don't sell themselves. People don't even know about them, how they're going to even find them, even if they are great. So what does it cost for people to find out about your product? Is that relatively the same as developing the product? Is it more? Is it less? Anybody?
True.
Somebody I heard saying more. A show of hands, who thinks it's more? This is an easy way to... Okay, well, those of you who said more, you're right. The staggering thing is how much more. It's usually double. If you look at a software company, for example, P&L, you'll see that on average, companies will settle out at around 15 to 20% of their P&L being spent on R&D, and 30 to 40%, in other words, double, on sales and marketing. So what I'm pointing out to you, Jerry, is even if you've got a brilliant product, how it'll end up playing out in your business model is that double the amount that you're spending on your product is going to be spent, just as was volunteered from the back there, on taking it to market. And that's what this business model is all about. It's about how you get multipliers and levers to actually take the cost out and the revenue up. And in fact, I'll go one step further. I will say that the perfect startup store, by the time you finish this session and the next session, should be very easy for you to define. It should be a disruptive business model with a disruptive technology, and then you're obviously focusing on a new market opportunity or target segment with an innovative way to get it there. You get those three things, you have my attention. Now, I'm not saying, by the way, that great companies don't get formed with one or even two of those, but if you have all three, you really have the perfect startup store. So let's get you started on thinking about some of these models. Excuse me while I reattach my mic. These models here are just a sampling of the ones that I want to pick out. The wonderful thing about them, and the reason I picked them, is many of these companies didn't exist, 5 or 10 years ago. One of the fastest growing companies ever is Groupon, and they came out with a completely new business model. One of my favorites, which I used for a while and didn't understand the business model until I sort of thought about it, was Mint. It's not a company that's actually trying to make money out of the software the way Intuit did to process your finances. It's actually a lead gen business that's actually driving lead generation to many of the financial services providers. And in our own portfolio, even though Jameis can't talk about it, Demandware has a very innovative business model, which, written in the S1, is all about revenue share. I could say no more than that. But it's an example of what I think I'm making a point on here, that is, every one of these companies is at least in part being successful because of a disruptive business model. And we will talk about some of these examples, but they might be things that you've never even thought about associated with technology before, such as, for example, how do you do crowdsourcing? There's an innovative company in Boston called UTest that's actually taking people from around the world to test mobile phones in all the different environments around the world. You might say, well, why is that a big deal in a business model? Well, think about the alternative. There are so many different phone types, so many different carriers that can be used in so many different places. There's no possible way you could recreate an environment that would test all the different scenarios for mobile phones and mobile applications. But if you crowdsource it all around the world, you can get a real sampling of what might be the way to test things. So their business model actually not only solves that problem, but actually, of course, leverages low-cost labor around the world as a lever to help them be very effective in their test. So I would say any one of these examples is one of many I could have picked to, again, hopefully get you thinking about what could you do to be disruptive. So what are the sample questions I'd recommend you start with? Well, amazingly, people come in and they almost invariably say, we have a product. Yes, you may have a product, but is it really a product, or is there a process associated with that product being used? In which case, is the process more valuable than the product? Do you really only have software, or do you have to have services to actually make this successful? In which case, is the service more important than the software? In open source, you will find that software is free, so unless you have services, there's no value. Is it open or proprietary, and so on and so forth. Here's one I'll pick out for you, which I think is rapidly emerging as an interesting new business model. As we get networks of people working around these products and services, we're collecting tremendous amounts of data on people. And in fact, the best example of that is probably going to be one of the most interesting new IPOs this year, and that's Facebook. Facebook's value is not its software. I mean, it's great software. It's impressive that PHP's scaled to be able to do, to serve hundreds of millions of users. But that's not what we're paying for. We're paying for ability to connect to people. And guess what they're monetizing? They're monetizing the fact that we've all connected and told them what we are doing all day so they can figure out what really is valuable to them, the data behind that enables them to target us more effectively. So their value is in their content or their data. Maybe they would say simply their data. My point being here, this is an example of where I would encourage you to question early, what is the set of values that is at the core of your business? So let's go to exactly that. Your first key question should be, what is your core value? Those of you who haven't heard me talk before, I've said this many times. I was one of those students who needed mnemonics to remember anything. So you'll find I use mnemonics everywhere. I couldn't have said corny, but just forgive me. This is the way that hopefully you'll remember these things. The core of your capabilities should be literally, what is it that you've got of really exceptional value at the center of your proposition that you could build around, that you could create a model around? And when you tell me it's core, 9 times out of 10 when I'm sitting with an entrepreneur and I really question it, they haven't defined the core. They've defined a bunch of stuff, and when we really press hard, we can actually get even more focused. So I'll often hear, oh, we've got a great software product. Okay, let's talk about what that product does and for who. And then when we really get down to it, we'll find out that a small piece of what somebody's actually building is really the core innovation. So in the case that we're going to talk about tonight with Akiban, you'll find out that they actually are in the database business, but the core of their innovation is actually a very critical new piece of how you process data. And they didn't need to recreate the entire database infrastructure. They're leveraging a lot of open source to do that. So let's have a look at some examples from the ones we just talked about. I already gave you a sense of how to think about core in the example of Facebook. Their real innovation is probably the user network, but if you went to the core, I think it's data. And what they do with that data, obviously, in terms of using it for advertising as a business model is really interesting. Now, they may change that. They may decide that at some point there are other values, but if they hadn't got that core right early on, I think it would have been very difficult. Another one I think that's just gone public, so it's topical, would be Yelp. Yelp could have been thought about as a community, could have been monetized in many different ways, but in the end, the content's become really the core of the value there. Again, if you look at what's going on now in the world of the net in particular, a lot of times what people are building is some form of user-generated content around a network, and there are many ways you could monetize that. But I would say to you, the most important thing you should do is, again, instead of just saying, well, how can I monetize it? And just say, oh, well, advertising's the lowest thing. Before you do that, say, well, who else am I competing with? And if everybody's advertising using advertising in the same way as you are, you probably don't have a competitive advantage. So try to flip it. Try to create an innovator's dilemma. You think about what Christensen has talked about many years, which is creating some way to do something that can't be followed, as opposed to just following what everybody else has done. And so when you think about monetizing your core, think about where others are most vulnerable and where you could do something that, again, changed the game, go back to that metaphor, and rewrote the rules and gave you some way of monetizing that was really tough for others to follow. I'm a huge proponent of open source. If you haven't figured that out, do a lot of investments in that space. And the reason I love it is that it's tough to compete with free, which is really what open source is and it's cool. But it's very easy for open source companies, therefore, to attack existing marketplaces with an offering that is delivering the same value at no cost and focused on making the customer successful with support. Because the customer loves that and the competitor can't compete with free. So think of things in those ways, whatever it is that you're addressing. And if open source helps you think about it, I'm happy to talk to you more about why we love that as a business model. Okay, so core is first point. Now I'm going to introduce you to the next two concepts, multipliers and levers. And they work around your core. So these are not, separate to it. Once you know what your core value is, how can you multiply it, meaning increase the revenue, increase the reach of customers you get to, or increase the coverage or market share that you get? That's really what multipliers are all about. And I'm going to bring these to life with some examples in a minute.
Right.
On the other side, levers reduce the costs, reduce the time, and reduce the resources involved in producing your product or getting it to market or in capturing that value. And if you get both of these things working for you, as the diagram suggests, they really can create extraordinary value on top of your business model, the core of your value proposition. So what are some examples? As you all know, my experience comes from software, so let me pose a question.
I think it was, what do you mean by reduce resources? And what you need to have a lot of resources in all that to be part of the work?
Great question. So the question, just so everybody heard it, is what did I mean by reducing resources when we just said that, for example, taking products to market requires a lot of resources? What I mean is, how could you reduce the resources that are required to take it to market? So I'll give you a simple example, I'm going to preview what I'm about to talk about, but if you could create viral marketing where your user was actually selling for you, that's obviously going to reduce your costs. Does that make sense? So that's an example of a lever. And by the way, people talk about viral marketing all the time. It's a very tough thing to define. There are all sorts of models people have and coefficients they create and everything else. I'll give you a really important example of viral marketing. Reference selling. If you really love something and you refer it to somebody else, that's the beginning of viral marketing right there. So making happy customers is the beginning of viral marketing. And figuring out how to get very happy customers armed with the right way to reference sell, just giving them the basics of what typically is in most people, which is they want to justify the purchase they've already made if they like it anyway. So give them the tools to do that. And then, of course, you can do all sorts of offers and things to promote it. Anyway, did that answer your question? It's totally great. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, so for examples, as I said, I'm in software. So I'm going to use these as talking points, but I think these apply to many different businesses. So the first category that we're talking about is exactly what we just discussed, which is sales and marketing. It's usually such a huge part of the P&L that if you could start to get a multiplier working for you here, it's very valuable. And things that may make a difference here are things like tiered pricing. So in other words, if you sell a product at one price in all flavors, that's possibly exactly the right thing to do for simplicity's sake. But wouldn't it be better if you could get people to get it free, first of all, so it was literally frictionless to start off with, and then upgrade and upsell and add value and obviously add capabilities and so forth going forward? Because every time you acquire a customer, as long as you keep them, the ability to upsell is obviously a lot less expensive than creating a whole new customer relationship. So I know that sounds obvious, but that's right there an example of a multiplier. And it's a reason why tiered pricing and models like freemium can be so helpful. The other typical multiplier you'll hear is channels. This is definitely applicable to almost any business. You could go out and create a sales force for every product, I'm sure. But wouldn't it be more effective to use somebody else's sales force? To use somebody who's already got the customer relationship, who's already written the contracts with major enterprises, and just leverage this? I can tell you that's one of the biggest challenges for startups, is that just the contracting process alone in the Fortune 1000 is horrifying. I see a few smiles at the front here because I constantly sit in boardrooms with, the forecast, and we know that the deal is closed, but the contract is still to come. And we're like, okay, is it EMC we're dealing with, or is it HP? And, everybody knows their stories there. The point is, the channel, in many instances, will already have the relationship with that end customer. And so if they've already written the contracts and they can literally just add this as an addendum or slide it in on an existing contract, you just took all that friction out, reduced your cost of selling, and obviously are able to get a multiplier in your business. So next example would be in the product. Most people think about products in a very straightforward way as being, it's obvious that this is going to be great value and therefore people should want to buy it. That should be the case, but you can get a lot smarter than that. I'm going to introduce two concepts to you tonight. Slippery products. Yes, I said slippery. And another of my mnemonics, which is another way of saying friction-free, and what I call Russian doll packaging. And I think you'll have some fun with these tonight when you get to the workshop. But the last of which is technology stacks. And again, I'll give you a simple example of it. This is how you can insert yourself into somebody else's technology stack to get a multiplier out of going to market with them. So let's start with the levers. How do we take the cost out? Well, the world has changed dramatically since that 20-year-old example I was telling you about with Symantec, where we used to have to sell through two-tier distribution, and we used to have to spiff salespeople at these ridiculously large distributors that sold thousands of products, and so we had to get their attention. And now you can get anybody's attention anytime you want on the web and focus on doing it in a very cost-effective way with inbound marketing, using inside sales, for example, and creating things such as we were talking about, like viral campaigns. That dramatically takes down the cost of selling and marketing. That wasn't even an option when I started this industry. And so I would use it, and I would spend time thinking right from the get-go about how would you get your awareness, your interest, your understanding up using web and low-cost techniques like that. And that's why I said this is one side of the coin, the other side being go-to-market, that we'll talk about in the next session. The second example is less obvious, and people typically think about this too late in the game, so I'm encouraging you to think about it right up front, which is how do you take the cost out of producing your product, creating a product, and supporting it? And there are many ways you can do this. You can do it through offshoring or outsourcing or crowdsourcing in that example we talked about, or something called co-creation, which I'm going to give you an example of tonight, and again, technology stacks. So probably a lot of words up there. All I'll say is every one of them can be thought of as a potential lever. I don't think I need to explain every one of them, but I will pick, as I said, co-creation to go into as a differentiation. And then here's the last piece of this startup secret, which is you really want to find examples of things that work together. You've got a killer strategy on your hands if you can figure out how you can get focused on your core, find a partner to work with who will give you a multiplier market and a lever in taking the cost out of either building or delivering or supporting your product. And so two examples of that that I'd like to walk you through now. First of all, one in creating value, then another in delivering and capturing it. So what is co-creating? Well, the idea here is pretty simple, and it's going to come to light in a software world, I think, fairly easily. You could sit as a single organization and build your product with one development team. Or you could say, what is at the core of our product? And let's take an example that will make it easy for everybody to think of. Linux. It's an operating system. But at the absolute core of Linux is literally a kernel. And Linus thought about that and realized that the problem with existing operating systems was they've got huge and bloated. And why they got bloated? Because basically people had to have different versions of that for every single different kind of laptop or PC or server, and every kind of device driver and everything else that went associated along with it was yet another piece that had to be added onto it. So he wrote a brilliant core, super fast, super efficient, but he made it possible in a modular way for people to add onto it using open source, created a community, and got people thinking about how could they extend the product. And as a result of that, people like IBM, who was literally at the time nowhere in the operating system business. In fact, you could argue was really struggling with many different operating systems, AS400, the Z series on mainframes, etc. We're able to take Linux and unify their entire platform strategy with it. And they themselves, using open APIs and the open source nature of this, were able to write all the drivers for all of their different products and get what they needed, which was a unified operating system. What that did to Linux was unbelievable. It literally accelerated. Actually, I should have Carlos telling the story since he's been involved in it firsthand. But it literally accelerated the adoption of a single operating system that swept through the enterprise very quickly because it was free, open source, and instantly much more valuable to people, and they were able to focus on their differentiations, and people started building off of it. So that's an example, and that's an open source example. But if I jump to the top and I give you just a little bit of thinking around extensibility, this is a simple concept. If you build something that everybody wants to add value to, needless to say, that's going to multiply your value. I'm going to start at the most basic level that you can think of. Imagine you went to the kitchen and you put on a pot of boiling water, and you knew that everybody wanted soup. The first thing they're going to need is the pot of boiling water. And if you're the only guy who's got the pot of boiling water, people are going to come to you and put the ingredients in. The good news is they can add the stock to start off with. And if they decide, oh, they want to add vegetables to that, they could add vegetables. But maybe some people don't want that. So they'll take a ladle out of it and they'll create their own version, derivative of it. And they'll add, not vegetables, but maybe meat to it because that's the way they are. The next guy comes along wants to add pasta to it. The point is, somebody thought about that in a very basic way, and it's exactly what I'd encourage you to do with your product. They said, what is the core thing at the base of soup? Boiling water. Think about your value prop in that same way, and then think about how easy would it be for people to come in and take a ladle and take some out and create their own version of it, or add to it. If you can find ways to do that, and that's why I love extensible open APIs for software, for example, which is just a fabulous way for people to do this. And if you can do that really early on, you'll be very successful. Here's the next little detail, but a super important one. If you do it in a way that internally you test that right away. So in other words, let's say you're building an application, but the application requires certain core services, like, for example, user input, user validation, and so forth. Why did you write those as capabilities in your platform that you had to build on internally? So you had your team of apps builders who know what the application logic should be, but they have to internally build on the APIs for user validation, user input, user experience, etc. Immediately, you're creating a customer internally that is testing your openness and your extensibility of those APIs. And when I see software companies who do that, they build on themselves. I watch product development go way, way, way quicker. And I've seen it over and over again. Demandware, actually, although James can't talk, has done it superbly well internally. They do exactly that with their e-commerce application.
I disagree. That's right.
So it's a small tip, but it's a good starting point. Figure out how even internally you can build around your core, and you can have customers from one part of your organization working on another piece of the capability elsewhere. It's literally eating your own cooking, being your own customer. Summarizing this, I would say as follows. You can get smart about creation by thinking about who are all the other people who can contribute. And if you can find a way to actually incent them to get value out of co-creating with you, you're in a great starting point. It's going to be both a lever in terms of taking your cost down. It's going to be a multiplier in terms of those people obviously spreading the word. Okay. Now let's talk about another example of levers and multipliers in delivering and capturing value. Delivering and capturing value. Here is one which is pulled from a list of 20 I could have talked about, which again is a favorite for me. It's as simple as a strategic partnership, and yet it's as significant as to be a major lever or multiplier for, again, almost every software company I work with figuring this out. And I'm going to give you a specific example of what might make a great strategic partnership, where both levers and multipliers around the core can make a difference. So if you are a software company, you'll know this without me telling you. You have to figure out what are the key capabilities for your build around. And it always involves basic things like compute, network, storage, and database. I could have added 20 things in here. You probably don't have those as distinctions unless you're a security company or a database company. And you'll want to go and ultimately expose applications and services on top of that. If your core capability can fit into somebody else's stack right in the middle and fill a gap for that, for example, if you are able to be a load balancer that enables people to scale out, and you do that on top of people's database storage capabilities, then why not fit into their stack? Why not go build to their capabilities so that you literally neatly can integrate and create a much more fulfilled product experience for anybody who's trying to build applications at scale that need load balance? Well, obviously that's what the opportunity is in whole product strategic partnership. And whole product is a Jeffrey Moore term. As you know, I'm a student of his. He'll be here at the end of the series. And it really describes how you deliver a complete solution to your customer. So if you've only got a piece of it, you can find partners who've got the rest of it. I would say this is a great example of a multiplier deliverer that can work for you. What happens when you do this is best described with an example. In one of the companies I started in the analytics world, we had a capability to do what we called real-time inline analytics. What the hell did that mean? It meant that before that point, everybody who was doing analytics was typically getting reports, a week after things happened, or maybe a month after in some cases. And we said, guess what? Before you even transact with a customer, wouldn't it be helpful to find out if they're a profitable customer to deal with, what their preferences are, what the things are that they might also want to buy from you? And that required real-time inline analytics. But the trouble with that is analytics is a tiny piece of the challenge of getting that data, putting it in a database, cleaning it with what's called ETL systems, and then getting into a place where you could actually do what we did, which was the real-time inline analytics. And then on top of that, you had all sorts of things people wanted to do with them, like present them and even analyze them further in Excel, etc. So we realized the big giant in this space was IBM. So guess what? We did an unbelievably obvious thing, which was we wrote right into the core of IBM's stack and made sure we worked better than anybody else did with IBM's DB2 products and also their WebSphere products and their middleware, and also with their tooling even. And the result was not terribly surprising. We ended up getting huge revenue uplift, not just because people were able to sell our product with IBM, but because it brought credibility to us, that IBM was actually partnering with us and was taking our products to market. It opened all the doors. And on the other side of things, of course, it dramatically reduced our time to market because we weren't writing all that technology around us, and reduced our development costs, and ultimately resulted in them acquiring the company, which in many instances, by the way, even though it wasn't our intention, is a great backstop for a small company to have had that strategic partnership be so successful that that if nothing else plays out in your own, ultimate success, somebody's going to have you so well integrated that it'd be a no-brainer plan to acquire you. So I think strategic partnerships, an example being a whole product strategic partnership, are great levers, great multipliers, and great backstops for small companies. One little detail, and the devil often is in the details. And certainly it's true with startup companies. I hear people all the time say, oh, it's fantastic. I've got this new big company really interested in me, and they're going to co-sell everything. Okay. Who's incented to co-sell it? If they don't have their sales force incented to do it, they might be getting more advantage out of you than you are out of them. There are always details like that. It's really worth paying attention to. If you get them to resell it, might be great. But if they suddenly bring you 1,000 customers and you've got all the support cost, you might actually find you're losing money. Likewise, I often see small companies make this mistake too. They go and write OEM deals, and they think they've got tremendous distribution reach, but they've got no upsell capabilities. They basically just gave away the golden goose. Huge mistake. So here are some things you can do. The first is actually a strategy, not just to OEM, but also for, in general, helping you with your products and how you get multipliers and leverage on them. It's what I call building a Russian doll. It's going to be very obvious, I hope, where you might do this, and then I'm going to get one of our companies to come and talk about how they do this. Come up with a version that's free. Then find some way to give limited access to it for a different price, some upsell. Give a personal edition out. Once it gets used by lots of people, make a workgroup edition. If lots of workgroups start using it, make a corporate edition. Once it goes global, make an enterprise edition. It isn't that hard, but you'd be amazed how many times this is the difference between, for example, an OEM deal working and not. If you know you've got all those editions, and you just do an OEM edition, for example, on the personal edition or the workgroup edition, you know you can go back and sell all the capabilities of the corporate edition or the enterprise edition. And therefore, getting the reach from the OEM made tremendous sense because you can do the upsell. But don't go in there without that in your back pocket. Know upfront what you're going in there with. Know exactly upfront what you're going to do as an upsell. And then to the point about going to market in general, this strategy works out for lots of other reasons. You'll find that it's a great way of giving an adjustable starting point to people. It's a great way of allowing people, in the sense, to taste a small piece of the value. And if you do that free, that's a great strategy in many instances. And then it gives you all these upsell options. And it gives you tremendous channel flexibility, not just with OEMs, but you can go to, for example, different channels for a personal edition than you would, for example, for an enterprise edition. Or you can go to VARs who want to build around, for example, or systems integrators who want to build around a very small piece of your core functionality because they want to differentiate with all the capabilities they might bring in a vertical market. Let's say you go to a VAR, for example, that takes just the core and takes it to a medical market. And yet another one, who takes the core and goes after the financial market. That's a great strategy that can play out if you do Russian doll packaging. In other words, if you figure out how to get these capabilities. But if all you come out with is one galactic edition, which has everything for everybody in every market, it's going to be really hard for people to deal with you. And you'll be, again, amazed how many times the biggest problem when we see startups is they try to put every feature for every person into the first product. And we all know that the result of that is that usually collapses under a certain weight. So some of you will have read Eric Ries's book on minimum viable product. Minimum viable product is one example of what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about the business model associated with it. That's the technology piece. This is how do you create the business flexibility around it by packaging it in a way that you can go to market in different ways. Okay, I'd like to introduce Akiba now and David McFarlane to give his example of how he's created somewhat of a good example, not just in open source, but also with packaging different options and giving himself this capability. David, in fact, come join us.
So just an opportunity to maybe walk you through how we've actually taken several of these capabilities and combined them in this go-to-market strategy. Just a reminder, some of you may know from the prior meetings, but at the very core of what Keaton does, what our secret sauce is, and it was this man in the middle here who invented it, is something we call table grouping. Simply put, we understand how an application uses data, and then we group that data together, and the net result is that transactions and queries run 10 to 100 times faster. It's a huge breakthrough in terms of capability. So what we've done is that we've taken that core capability and we've released that as an open source product. The idea is to drive as much viral business as possible. It's developers who drive these technology decisions. It's the developers that is the 10,000, 100,000 strong sales force that we can use to compete with the likes of Oracle's. What we've also done is allowed those developer communities to extend our product by integrating it into their own development environment. So for Ruby and Hibernate, we integrate into their environment so it becomes a value add to their stack. And again, they drive it through their own distribution and they own that value and they drive that value. But what we did is we created a pluggable architecture. And as a pluggable architecture, it means that we can add critical additional components that will add unique value to the product. So the first is something we call MySQL replication. It just means that you can take this and now plug it into a pre-existing MySQL application. If you build something on the LAMP stack, it's not scaling well, it's running slowly, you can take the Akiba stack, plug it in, redirect the queries, and we'll run those queries really quickly for you. And that's just one example, but the key point here is to have a whole series of these capabilities that you can add and extend the product with, which is what we've done. And you can also use that in terms of a multi-tier pricing strategy. And then finally, as you build community out there in the market, we've added a series of electronic services that you can add. Things that you can deliver as a SaaS capability back out to that market. It makes it easy for them to adopt, but it also kind of locks them in to your service and your brand. And even within those additions, there are certain community aspects, like the grouping algorithms. You get lots of people to combine together to contribute to different grouping strategies that then can be shared across the community. So those are just some of the examples of how we extended.
Thank you, David. And I'll just leave that up for 1 second. I think he's used pretty much every example I've already said tonight. There's effectively a core that is very clearly defined, and he's actually made it open source so people can extend it. And he's also said, look, we're going to have several editions in that Russian gold model, so we could sell this through many different channels and sell different capabilities. And he's also said we're going to have upsell and cross-sell capabilities from that. And in effect, he's got costs being taken out through open source and co-creation. He's got multipliers being created, obviously, through the community. And he's got, obviously, multiple options through the Russian gold packaging. So it's a great example, and I can tell you that, would it be fair to say, well, you tell me, I shouldn't need the witness. How much time have you spent on the business model of the CEO relative to other things in your business and like building the product?
Well, and the one thing I would say is from the very inception of the product, we had these ideas in mind. So one of the things that was very important, I would say to people, is that you really want to think about how you're going to package this value up and deliver it to the market. It isn't necessary that it was hugely time-consuming for us to do that, but it was really important that you think about it right up front and you don't wait to the end of the development cycle to apply it.
And it's a terrific point. What David's saying, just to underline it, is If you develop the product in a monolithic fashion, then obviously it's going to be really hard if you later decide you want to slice it up, sell it in different ways. So thinking about the business model as early as you're starting your product development is actually not too early. It's exactly right. So thank you, David. Great point, David. Okay. Apple made a launch today, no Steve Jobs, so I'm going to have to do as the poor substitute. One more thing, and actually I think it's a really fundamental thing. There is actually a tendency for people to think about these things, i.e. business models, as snapshots. But in fact, what you really want to do is think about, on an ongoing basis, how is it your product or service is sold? And so I'm going to take you through a series of things that will give you a sense of the product lifecycle. And it starts with something that I've always really enjoyed watching companies who get it right do. And that is creating what I call slippery products. When I told my daughter this, she said, "Dad, what are slippers got to do with products?" Kind of missed the point, but anyway, we'll see if we can get it across tonight. Okay, the first thing is creating a product that is simple to use. Obviously, the simpler it is, the more likely it is for people to instantly get it. The second is low to no initial cost. That takes more friction out of it. The third is installs easily. You'd be shocked how many times, even if something's free as an app on your iPhone, think about it. It can take a while for you to install it, and it actually isn't immediately functional. It doesn't have some component, or it tries to fill in too much data or whatever it is to get it going. You're not going to use that. And then how does it prove its value really quickly? If it instantly delivers something back to you before you have to put a lot of stuff into it, you're going to start using it. Next on the list is obviously, does it play well with others? In the enterprise, this is incredibly important because if it disrupts everything, even if it's free and it's incredibly easy to use and you're getting value from it, but you have to replace everything before you can use that, this could be really tough. Next is obviously ease of use. But I say this, and yet it's amazing how many people spend zero time up front thinking about user experience. The user experience is everything. It's usually what describes, obviously, how often it gets used, how it gets circulated, and so forth. And so pay attention to that up front. From a business standpoint, we've been talking about this, the customer is going to look at payback and ROI. And so make it obvious right up front why this pays for itself, why it justifies itself. In the end, my favorite one is the why. Why not? Why customers can't live without this should be what they should be thinking. Not why might they try it, but why can they literally not live without it? That's back to that gain-pain equation for those of you who are here. If you give them so much gain and there's no pain, because it's so slippery, friction-free to adopt this product, they're going to buy it. So I would actually say one of the most important elements of the business model is, in fact, creating slippery products. It's creating friction-free products. And oftentimes people say, well, R&D's got nothing to do with business model. I'd say it's got a ton to do with it. We just talked about one example, which David gave, which is about how you chunk it up. But actually, if you right from the get-go figure out what your business model is and you decide to create a slippery product, you can take a ton of the friction, in other words, the cost, out of marketing, distribution, sales, service, and so forth. So it's worth taking that thought really early on into your thinking as you find your business. And to help bring this to life, I'm going to introduce Mark Tabor, our CEO from Active Endpoints. And as Mark comes up, I'm going to tell you a little bit of story to set him up, because I actually inherited this investment, and that's never an easy thing when you're a partner in a venture firm. I didn't inherit Mark. I was lucky enough to go recruit him. But it was a middleware product. It was a tiny piece of a product, actually. They had something called a beetle engine. Yeah, you don't need to know what that is. I'll just tell you it was a feature. And so it wasn't even a whole product. And Mark came on, and the first thing he said to me when we were going through recruiting is, I don't want to talk to you about the product. I want to talk to you about the business model. I've got a vision for how I could take this thing to market. And I even use the word slippery, although I think I've coaxed him into using it now. Way. And it turned out that he's figured out how to sell complex, very difficult stuff to sell anyway, in any middleware, in an exciting way, typically selling, something of the order of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of value. But this is a company that's doing millions of dollars of revenue and has literally been growing at phenomenal rates every year without having a single outside salesperson. Extraordinary. So Mark, how did you do it?
Yeah, so in actuality, we did structure the whole company out of this concept of making it simple and how we bring it to market. Process automation, which is what we do, it's been around for a long time. Business process management, the corporate IT people have been, able to accomplish things for their users for a long time, but it's way too hard. And so the concept of active endpoints has been, how can we enable the business user to make their life simpler by doing these things themselves? And so the example that I've shown here is, how can we make the life of a salesperson easier? They interact with an application. Most of them use something called Salesforce.com, which is really just a database to collect information. But salespeople don't want to write reports. They don't want to gather the information. And because of that, they frequently miss common things that they know they should do, but they just forget, and they don't do it consistently over time. So what we did was we invented some technology to allow a business user to do their own automation. So in fact, you could use a mobile phone, and the text-to-speech capability, speech-to-text capability that is, for example, in an iPhone, using Siri, you can talk into the phone, say, show me my meetings today. A guide will come up, and you can just speak into it what happened at the meeting. You can hit a button if you want a thank you email to go out, or whatever it is you normally do after a meeting. If you want to set up a follow-up or something like that, it will automatically happen in the background. And so it's great in the fact that we've done it, but the real innovation is the fact that we allow the business user to do it themselves. And so we took that concept, and really our entire go-to-market, really everything about the technology and what we do encompasses this concept of slippery. Though I didn't know the acronym until yesterday, Michael. But it was, but it's exactly what we do. We try to make this product as easy to use as possible. We tried to make it as frictionless as possible. So in fact, you could just go to our website, you can just enable yourself, you can try it, you can use it, you can interact with it, you can get a free version of it to use. I have Eric Eggertson, our head of sales. Maybe you want to share how some of our customers are doing that?
Sure, Mark. I'll just mention one customer, Plymouth Rock Energy, down in the New York City area. Traditionally, it's been an old line supplier of coal and oil to large facilities. That business isn't such a great business anymore, so they transformed themselves into a broker of energy, including electricity and natural gas, and they use Salesforce.com for all of their new customer signups. So they had to customize Salesforce.com tremendously. When you sign up a new customer as an energy broker, you have to specify the supplier, who the distribution channel is going to be, whether they're going to pay a premium for green energy sources. And it turned out for the Salesforce.com users, the sales reps signing up a new customer, it was a very complex process. They had to go through the Salesforce screens. So we met a gentleman down at a Salesforce.com event in New York City on a Wednesday. The following Monday, we gave him a demo via a GoToMeeting, via a web meeting. He was able to get on our cloud-hosted product, started building his little process wizard the next day that his sales reps could use to go through this complex process of onboarding a new customer. By the end of the week, he had it working, and the following Monday, placed the order with us. So, going back to some of the points, you can probably map what happened there into these points, but installs easily. He was able to sign up on the web. He could prove value in just a couple of days by creating a wizard that walked their users through these complex processes. What else do I want to think? Plays well with others. Having the Salesforce.com integration has been tremendously valuable to us. Mike, I would call it both a lever because it reduces our marketing costs tremendously. We know who our market is, and we're able to get to them through Salesforce. And it's a multiplier because we're able to increase revenue by selling to users. Last one was we sell it per user per month. The guy was concerned he's only going to have 15 users to start out. We said that's fine. You can buy a 15-user license. When you add 10 more next year, you just buy 10 more licenses.
Right. That's you guys very well. And I think, you can pick lots of companies. The reason I chose Active Endpoints is it could be a horribly complex sale normally to be able to sell the tool. All of their competitors, by the way, people like IBM are going in with three-person sales calls, six-legged sales calls are free. And they're spending a lot of money, and they're having, as a result, to charge orders of magnitude in some cases more for their products and services. And this company has taken market share away on a consistent basis, been doubling year on year, in some cases in their product sales through this slippery product concept. And thanks to the team for being so innovative and approaching it that way, where the technology at the core of it, it's interesting, but in a very highly competitive market. So let's put it all together. I want to give you a very clear metric, which you've probably seen. If you haven't, you certainly should know about. And that is this notion of coming up with an understanding of if your business model is working or not. And for startups, the metric that people now are getting used to is lifetime value. That is, how much can you get from a customer over the lifetime of working with them, divided by the cost of acquiring that customer. And in general, if your lifetime value from a customer isn't around 3 or greater the times the cost of acquiring that customer, you probably don't have a profitable business model. And unfortunately, in startups, most times people don't really spend time to think about this up front either. But all the multipliers and levers that I talked to you about should be factored into what is it that you're doing to obviously increase, on the one hand, the lifetime value. How can you get more out of customers over time with, for example, that Russian doll packaging we're talking about, more and more versions or editions? Or in reducing the cost of acquiring a customer in the ways we just talked about with things like strategic partnerships. And there are many examples that I didn't go through, like channels and so forth, that can give you reach and take cost out too. In the end, though, when you boil it all down, you should find that this ratio plays out, as I said, to roughly 3 or more times the value you're capturing than the cost you're implying to get that customer successful. Now, that model's been, I'd say, pretty successfully adopted by many of my customers. But I noticed something over the last few years as it's become accepted that's been missing. And so I want to introduce this because what we found is almost every startup, just as you heard Eric describe, gets in at one point and then has a relationship to maintain the customer to get the full value. And I find most people ignore that latter set re-engagement with the customer. So I'm going to give you a sense of what you really need to think through. This refinement, to me, keep it interesting, is a matter of life and death. I'm going to talk about a customer life cycle in a very simple methodology to start off with. See, try, buy, fly, die. Think about it for a second. That's basically what happens when you look for products. You see it, you try it, you buy it, you run it, fly it, and ultimately it dies some kind of death. And that cycle is typically described by people in this kind of a bell curve. And the problem with it, at least in the software business and many B2B businesses, is if it really looks like this, you have a long, costly customer acquisition cost, a slow payback period, and very short lifetime value. And if that's really what your business model looks like, in my opinion, you're in trouble. And unfortunately, it's what a lot of startups I see exactly have as a business model. And so I'm going to try to help you think about ways you could get beyond that. We'll talk about this more in the go-to-market session next week. But one of the first things I always see when I do postmortems with companies is that they haven't broken these stages down from the simplistic see, try, buy, and fly model that I talked to you about into much more granular stages. And granular stages, just to give you an example of this, would be awareness. How do you even discover somebody? Interest. How do you get their interest? How do you get them to understand what your capabilities are, then engage with you, then try it, then purchase it? And I could probably pick 30 or 40 more if I really wanted to break it down. We'll talk about more of this, as I said, next week. But just for now, think about this as follows. Once I've bought the product, how do I stay engaged with you? What is it that I do to repurchase? So I'm going to introduce an obvious constant, an obvious idea here. And that is, how do you re-engage the customer after they've bought? How do you actually get them to retry the next capability that you introduce? Either the upgrade or the update or the whole new version that you just came out with. So in this cycle of re-engagement and repurchasing, and there are a lot of steps that are basically the same as you did when you first introduced the product or connected with Helsner. And if you get them right, it turns out you really dramatically change the cycle. In fact, what you really want to do is, of course, have the cycle occurring over and over again. The customer keeps coming back to you as your preferred supplier or as your trusted source, or as a person where they'll buy the next set of capabilities. And if you can do that successfully, what you'll find you can do is dramatically extend the life cycle of the customer. And if you use things like slippery products that we just talked about, you'll have a much more simple experience up front and take all the friction out. We'll have a much more rapid adoption with that Russian doll packaging as an example, how you might do that. And then very importantly, you'll have a much extended life cycle because you'll find ways to re-engage the customer over and over again. So it's a lot to take in, and what I felt like I should do is give you an example of how actually you can avoid the death that happens here in the software world with an example of exactly this. So how are you going to have a long, happy life is really the question in the software world. Well, when I started out, as I said, I'm dating myself, IT was the only person that installed stuff. They were the only people that customized it. There were infrequent upgrades. Most of the stuff actually sat as shelfware, as we called it. It was all proprietary, and people licensed this on a perpetual basis. The poster child for this probably would have been Oracle, quite frankly. But it's all changed. And in fact, if you use all the techniques we just said, what you can use is the web to make it easy for people to trial stuff. You can then make it easily self-service, as you just heard, Eric give that example. The customer didn't have to come in for training or figure out how to configure or install the thing. They were just using it on their web live, trying it in their own situation. It can be on demand, so there's absolutely nothing for them to actually buy initially. It can be available literally over the cloud. And software as a service is very much the poster child to that. And obviously, if you make it open source or extensible in some way, they can extend it or add to those capabilities themselves. And ultimately, through a subscription model, they can buy it as they need it and pay for it as they use it. The result of all of that is what is extended life cycle. It creates this incredibly easy basis for people to try things, adopt them, and then buy it up in English, and then on to 13 basis, keep reusing it. And underneath it, the engine for it is very important for you to think about, which is how to keep deep engagement happening. And I'll say again, what I often observe with startups is they think they've got the customer, and they think that just continuing to introduce new innovations is the answer. Maybe. You might have that kind of customer. But how many times have you downloaded an iPhone app recently, for example, and then never used it again? Show of hands. Okay, a lot of you. That's exactly what I mean by this blue circle. I will tell you that that's a big problem for mobile app developers, and it's just a bigger problem for almost every example of software in B2B or other worlds too. So you really got to think about this blue circles I put up there, this notion of acquiring, not just acquiring, but re-engaging customers. So let's bring that back to the model that I said earlier and just add that extra layer. What this is about is not just the levers and multipliers around your core, but also thinking about how you not just acquire the customer, but re-engage them and continuously stay in touch with them so that you don't get that iPhone app dying, but in fact, you find some way to reconnect with them. It might be a new map that you send them out, it's GPS, or it might be some new set of content that you send them out, it's a recommendation service, or it might be some new data that you send them out that makes it obvious for them how they can connect if it's a dating application. Those things turn out to be the difference between products that have long life cycles, that engage the customers, that get more lifetime value out of them than anything else. And so I reinvented that acronym and called it cost of customer acquisition and re-engagement. It's the R there. And instead of it being lifetime value, it's life cycle value. That's the L, the C in that. And it really is important to think about LCV, the life cycle value of your customer. What can you get out of them over and over again, not just once? And also, what does it cost you to re-engage? So when I describe this to startups, I find that most people have challenges initially getting what do I mean by those kinds of things. So here's an example. Re-engagement costs are typically things like support. Support should absolutely be factored into it. It's not just sales and marketing. Keeping your customers often involves customer service. And if you're in a B2B environment and you're selling anything like a complex product, it often involves professional services. So all of those costs should be factored in to the CARC, the cost of acquiring and re-engaging customers. Any questions before I move on? We're nearly at the end, so to get you to your workshop. Okay, so now you have a model which I think is really quite compelling to be able to work the things. And for those of you who were here when we talked through the value proposition on gain pain, it also is exactly the same concept and principle as we talked about in gain pain. They're just two views of the same problem. For those of you who were there for this workshop, we talked about how could you take the pain out of a customer getting to grips with your product and give them all visibility at the gate. Well, think about it for a second. That is how the customer will view. What you're going to view on the other side is the measurement of how much cost is it taking for you to actually get the customer to adopt this product. That's the CARC. And how much can you get from that customer as they get those gains over time throughout that life cycle? That's the LCB. So they're just two sides of the same principle. And they work around this whole notion of the core of your value proposition. So good business models, you will constantly be going back. I can make this single template a basis for discussion with every startup. What have we done to take the pain out? How is that reducing our cost of acquiring the customers? What have we done to make it obvious to customer what gain they get right up front? How can we make that work over time to be a very large lifetime value, life cycle value of the customer? So with that, I'm going to summarize and get us onto our workshop. I have a question.
I guess there was a clear me the concept around advisory goals.
Yeah.
Is the message that you're recommending to have various versions of a product, a single user, a small business, an enterprise? Or I guess the counter for that is what happens if your product is only geared towards enterprise, large companies, and I assume individual average Asbury wouldn't have much doubts. My distance.
No, we've actually got a great example of some challenging on. So, in your product, use a repeating question. Does the Russian gold strategy work, for example, if you've got a product that's only valuable if you sell it to an entire enterprise? The answer is yes, I believe it does, because very rarely will you be able to get an entire enterprise to adopt a product in one go. It's just indigestible. I made this mistake that we all put out. I try to sell people like Pfizer an entire sales force package for analytics and say, hey, why don't you buy this whole thing? This entire sales force will get value out of it. You will see all the data on all the products you sell. It's not going to work because it's so difficult to get a big enterprise to adopt any change. You have huge pain in doing that. And it's going to take you months in a sales cycle. You're going to spend a lot of money doing it. But even though the value might be the whole sales force, keep getting them something right off the bat, which is not, here is some data on the benchmark of just one of your sales teams, or a small region, for example, of how they're relatively performing in terms of their sales effectiveness. That's immediately valuable for them. And that small team can adopt them very quickly. It's that team sees success with it, they'll recognize it elsewhere, and pretty soon we'll get, obviously, relative regions, but also economic groups, divisions or theaters, as they call them in my company's adoption. So the reason I always think about it is that it's all down to the same pain gain equation. You've got to take the upfront cost of getting that customer, and you've got to make it really digestible and easy to the customer. So if you don't want to go to Russian dollars before chunking out the alpha out of head, the point is find digestible ways to get that first introduction to your customer to be as painless, as slippery as possible. And then, obviously, it's a great product that you can keep re-engaging. And that's why this piece is so critical. You can keep re-engaging them and adding more value, opening up more and more of the dollars, if you will, exposing more value. Then you will get more and more lifetime value over that customer. That answer?
It sounds like it's a way to also start gradually building credibility.
Absolutely.
And just like,
Absolutely. The biggest challenge startups have, and it's amazing how many times we struggle with this, is just that one word you use, credibility. I think I mentioned it on one of my slides. Oftentimes, strategic partnership is at the top of the list providing a company credibility. An example from our portfolio, was to give people another real-world case study, was we had a great entrepreneur, we backed him again, actually, Ash Ashutosh, in the storage world. Came up with a concept, a company called AppIQ, to make it possible for people to store things that independent to be underlying infrastructure. So in other words, you can metal or your storage from IBM or ADC or computer or whatever. The application of that, you can use that like storage in the most cost-effective pattern. It's a brilliant idea, but the problem is, application is mission critical. Storage is sold by big companies. There's only about 5 of them in the world who own that marketplace. And go ahead was a little company that can get in the middle of those two. He did a genius thing and found a way to make it possible for that to become effectively very simple for people. Hangos with a try. And then he went into a deal with one of the major vendors. And then it made it obvious that all the other 4 needed to play, otherwise it wouldn't be competitive. And pretty soon, he owned that marketplace and had a great exit and about things CTO storage at HP. And now we're back in his latest startup, Actifio, and he's doing it all over again. But he really understands this very, very well. Maybe I'll get up to one of the workshops. Does that answer your question? Any other questions from people before we summarize here? Okay. So as you go off to your workshop, what I want to try to get you thinking about is, what is your disruptive model going to be? How can you make it as significant as your technology? Can you focus on a core differentiation, not 20 things that you do, but hopefully one? And what will be the multipliers and leverage that you will give it with innovations like we've talked about, see, co-creation or strategic partners, or Russian doll packaging or slippery products? And then how would you measure that, not just once, but over the extended customer lifecycle with LCB and CARC? So I hope everybody had some fun this evening. I must say, I continue to be blown away by what a great group this is, because if you look at some of the things we were trying to do, we were trying to figure out, could you come up with a core value problem? A number of you took some pretty bold moves to not declare it as the obvious thing in the technology, but focused on things like data or data and analytics or content in one case. You were quick to figure out what your multipliers and your levers were. Some of you found some really great ways to make partnerships that were win-win, that would work on both sides of that, so multipliers and levers. And then a lot of you were talking very clearly about, just as you heard, how important the slippery product concept is to make it easy for people to get instant value out of this, and instantly they'll obviously start spinning the wheel. A few people definitely picked up on this life cycle concept and this notion of keeping people engaged, and I heard some good examples of that. And overall, although we didn't try to get you down to actually calculating your life cycle value and your customer acquisition and re-engagement costs, I felt like a lot of you grasped this so well that you have no problem doing those kinds of things. So I want to take my hats off to all of you and say congratulations, thanks for waiting.